So everybody wins and everyone gets a prize. 3 by-elections and a victory for each of the 3 main parties. But the gleam on the Tory trophy shines less brightly than the other 2, with a major swing away from the party in all 3 contests. Labour's big gain was Selby and Ainsty. They won here with a majority of just over 4,000. The Liberal Democrats took Somerton and Frome with a majority of 11,000. But the Conservatives held on to Uxbridge and South Ruislip with a reduced majority of less than 500. Our political editor Gary Gibbon is here. Quite a day.
Yes, and you might have expected Labour to be basking in the glory of that Selby result, but there's a bit of friction tonight, and senior figures in the Labour Party are taking pot shots at Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, because they think that his extension of the ultra-low emission zone to Uxbridge basically cost them the election there, and what would have been a clean sweep for the anti-Conservative forces. He's pushing back a bit on that, but it opens up all sorts of other questions about how Keir Starmer runs the party and whether there are great risks in moving beyond what he likes to do, which is not expose too many flanks and give the opposition his opposition too many targets to fire at. That's where he wants to take things, but some people are already saying you need to be more definitive and clearer. For the Tories, they're looking at that Uxbridge result, which they only held on to by the skin of their teeth, and thinking, well, this proves that actually wedge issues work. If you can find something that wedges people away from their normal party loyalties, and that might not just be things like ultra-low emission zones in outer London boroughs, but could be, almost certainly will be, the immigration issue, where they think they can peel people away from Labour. And for the Lib Dems, they're looking at the result that they got in Somerton and thinking, well, maybe we actually should be targeting more seats. They don't want to spread themselves as ridiculously thinly as they did in 2019, much to their embarrassment, but they are thinking of building up that list. The key takeaway, though, is any of those swings would get the Tories out of Downing Street. The narrow path to victory that Rishi Sunak has talked about that is available to the Conservatives remains a very narrow and difficult ravine.
We can win anywhere.
Our historic by-election victory.
No one expected us to win here.
3 party leaders claimed victory. The quality of the wins varied greatly.
I hereby declare that Keir Mather is duly elected.
Keir Starmer's 25-year-old namesake in Selby overturned a 20,000 Tory majority.
Thank you. Now, I want to begin my time as your MP by being very clear. I understand the enormity of what has just happened. I know what an honour this is.
For years, the cameras deserted Lib Dem campaigns. Today, they mobbed Sir Ed Davey through the narrow lanes of Somerton, scene of his party's latest by-election triumph.
Ed, we'll give a stopping when we get to the end here. Thank everyone for coming.
Hi Kelly, I'm Rishi, very nice to see you.
Rishi Sunak, by contrast, went to Uxbridge to celebrate the Tories just holding on to their seat here.
Look, Westminster's been acting like the next election's a done deal. The Labour Party's been acting like it's a done deal. The people of Uxbridge just told all of them that it's not.
What we saw in all 3 by-elections last night was that the third party was really squeezed. I mean, even when you look at how low they were in 97, they were squeezed down below that.
As the graph shows, those figures around 2 or 3% are even lower than the third party was getting in 1997, which is an election at which there was in itself quite a lot of tactical voting against the Conservatives. Even if it is at the level that it was at in 1997, that could be sufficient to make a significant difference to the outcome.
And it's all done on the quiet.
There's no explicit collaboration between the opposition parties, but the Labour Party will inevitably focus its resources in a general election on those seats where it thinks it's got the best chance. The Liberal Democrats will do the same.
Labour's disappointed candidate watched Uxbridge slip from his grasp in the early hours of this morning. His victorious Tory opponent said London Mayor Sadiq Khan's planned extension of the ultra-low emission zone, charging drivers of diesel and older petrol cars £12.50 a day, gave him victory.
Why do I think I won? Because the Uxbridge and South Russet residents voted for me because I was standing up in complete opposition for the ULEZ expansion.
I'm probably more geared towards the Labour Party. However, because of the ULEZ, I was uncomfortable with that.
Rishi Sunak's claiming it's his victory today.
Oh, well, that's a load of rubbish.
I mean, a sandwich of Keers, but it's nice to have 2 Keers as Labour MPs.
Keir Starmer, on a victory lap in Selby, said the Uxbridge result should make the party and the Mayor of London reflect.
We knew that ULEZ was going to be an issue. And of course, we all need to reflect on that, including the Mayor needs to reflect on that.
This rather jarred with the rest of it, in that the other things that we're trying to do are an attempt to make people more prosperous by harnessing the kind of change to a green economy to create new jobs, new wealth around the country, but do it in a way that also reduces carbon. And this was actually taking money off people, and it's in a regressive way.
Sadiq Khan suggested Uxbridge was always very likely to stay Tory.
That seat's never been Labour, even during the Tony Blair heydays of the 1990s and early noughties.
Another post-by-election victory Lib Dem stunt.
3, 2, 1!
Yesterday's by-elections also revealed still more anti-Conservative tactical voting. Labour and Lib Dem supporters lending their vote to the other side, where their first-choice party can't win. We saw a swing to Labour from the Conservatives, 24% in Selby, 7% in Uxbridge. That gives an average swing
just over 15%.
Yeah. We're told Labour needs a swing of about 12% to get a majority. Which one of those numbers should people be looking at and taking seriously?
That average swing across these two by-elections is exactly in line with the 15% swing that the opinion polls are on average currently pointing to.
But people in Tory high command who go around saying, oh, don't believe Labour's lead in the polls, don't believe their lead in the by-elections, will halve that and in a campaign maybe take even more off them. What does history teach us about that?
Well, unfortunately for the Conservatives, the precedents created by the by-elections on Thursday are not very happy. It is a further indication, together with the opinion polls, that the Conservatives are indeed in deep electoral trouble, and that we are seeing results from the ballot boxes of the kind that we have not seen since that, for the Conservatives, fateful 1992 to 97 Parliament.
Thousands of lifelong Labour voters have lent us their support to beat the Conservatives.
Where's that?
Keir Starmer doesn't publicly bless these moves, but he campaigns light where the Lib Dems have much better hopes. After the results yesterday in Selby and Somerton, both parties are wondering if they should now expand their target seats list.
Well, earlier I spoke to the chair of the Conservative Party and MP, Greg Hands. I started by asking him what he made of the poor night at the polls for the Tories.
Well, I think they're a mixed set of results. Clearly, we're disappointed by the results in Selby and Ainsty and in Somerton and Frome, but excited by the result in Uxbridge, where we defied the odds to win the Uxbridge by-election. Steve Tuckwell, I'm looking forward to welcoming him to Parliament and being a brilliant MP for the area.
How often have you uttered the words, thank God for ULEZ, since last night?
ULEZ is an important issue, a very important issue, but it also reflects something wider.
And it won you.
It was a big part of that.
It was the only part of
it wasn't the only part, but it's a big part of it, but also reflects something wider, Jackie, and that is this, that Labour, when Labour are in power, and they've had the London Mayor for the last 7 years in Sadiq Khan, they are not competent. They cannot deliver the people's priorities.
The winning Conservative candidate in Uxbridge and Ruislip didn't mention Rishi Sunak. In fact, he credited Sadiq Khan, the London Mayor, because he's the architect of ULEZ.
People don't think that Labour is a competent party of government. That is the doubts that people have about Labour. I said that people in Selby and Ainsty didn't come to the door saying that Labour was the answer or Keir Starmer was the answer.
But they didn't come out for you, and that is the problem.
But that is still why we're working hard. Why we're working hard, showing that Rishi Sunak is working hard and doing well as a Prime Minister. So the response to Rishi Sunak on the doorstep was very good. The response to Keir Starmer, nobody came to the doorstep with any enthusiasm for Keir Starmer.
If Uxbridge and South Ruislip is a verdict on Labour, what is the verdict in Selby, Somerton and Frome?
Clearly we're disappointed by those results. But if you look at, let me look at those results though, because in Selby and Ainsty was largely driven by a low turnout, Conservatives staying at home. Now that's not something I'm proud of. I'm the chairman of the Conservative Party. Conservatives not coming and voting Conservative, that is a problem. But there weren't people switching directly to Labour. And the doorstep at Selby and Ainsty, I didn't meet a single person come to the door saying the answer to their problems was Labour and Sir Keir Starmer.
I mean, the Prime Minister has said this morning that circumstances were not favourable, which is, I think, what you're alluding to. But those circumstances are entirely of your party's making.
No,
you've got a Prime Minister essentially forced out of the Commons for lying. You had an MP forced to stand down because of cocaine use. These were circumstances entirely of your party's making, and perhaps that is what you're being judged on.
I think it's important to draw a difference between the circumstances of the by-elections. You're right, the backdrop, the cause of why there was a by-election was not a favourable issue for the Conservatives. But I think overall, where people think what is driving the issues that matter to them in terms of cost of living, the waiting lists and the NHS, in terms of illegal migration, those are driven principally by the pandemic and principally by Vladimir Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. That is what drives people's views of the issues overall.
But the circumstances of the by-election, people may be looking at the level of MPs, at the integrity question, and deciding enough is enough. That is potentially an issue, isn't it?
Well, ultimately, those by-elections, whilst they did not have good backdrops, ultimately, for example, in Uxbridge, it was a referendum on who was going to be the next MP, not the last MP. The problem with the Labour candidate was that he changed his view, and that also reflects the problem Keir Starmer has. Keir Starmer cannot stick to a position. He says different things to different audiences. He's always trying to please the audience of the day.
Nadine Dorries takes a very different assessment, very prominent MP, as you know, takes a very different assessment of the victory in Uxbridge. She says, you know, this is about Boris Johnson, the former MP, and the angry Tories will not come out for Rishi Sunak because of what he did.
Well, I disagree with that because, clearly overall, Rishi Sunak's name is more popular than the Conservative Party overall. Rishi outpolls the Conservative Party. I know for a fact, I've done a huge number of doorstep conversations in Selby and Ainsty, in Uxbridge and Somerton and Frome. Every single conversation I've had has been improved by mentioning Rishi Sunak and the job that he is doing as Prime Minister. People respond well to that.
It just didn't work in those two constituencies.
In terms of where people reflect on the Conservative Party, there's still a lot of unhappiness about what the Conservative Party was up to last year, but people think that Rishi Sunak is the right choice for Prime Minister and doing a good job in difficult circumstances.
Analysts saying you are in deep electoral trouble and turning this round will be extremely difficult. Do you at least accept
Well,
that?
politics was never designed to be easy, and that is why we are working hard on the 5 priorities.
So you're convinced you can turn this round?
Well, I wouldn't be in the job if I wasn't convinced that we could win the general election when it comes, but it really is at the moment all about delivering in government for the people of the country, for the issues that matter to them, the cost of living, the NHS and illegal migration.
Greg Hands, thanks very much for talking to us this morning.
Thank you.
Well, earlier I also talked to Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner, and I began by asking her how she responded to the Conservatives' claim that London Mayor Sadiq Khan had lost Labour the election in Uxbridge because of his controversial plan to expand the ultra-low emission zone.
Well, it's clear that, ULEZ was an issue on the door, but this was a safe Tory seat that in 1997, with our landslide victory, we didn't gain it then. So I think it's a bigger pitch than that. We ran the Tories very close, within 500 votes. But of course, ULEZ was a problem and people did raise it on the door.
The challenge for you is that,
well,
that
the
it
challenge
cost
is
you
that
this
people...
by-election.
Sure, the challenge for us is that we've got to find a way of getting the funding so that people can move to electric vehicles and vehicles with less emissions without them being thumped for money that they can't afford after the Conservatives have crashed the economy and people's cost of living have gone through the roof. I can completely understand why they're saying I cannot afford to change my vehicle and you're going to charge me.
When Keir Starmer says Sadiq Khan needs to reflect on this now, what does reflection mean in terms of the ULEZ expansion going forward as far as Labour are concerned?
It means we've got to have a solution that means people can transition to greener cars without it costing them money that they don't have during a cost of living crisis. So that means we've got to find a way of enabling people to comply with the emission zone that we need, because of course this is having an effect on public health. And I actually think the public are with us on this. What they're not with us on is them feeling like they're getting charged and penalised because they can't afford to change their vehicles.
If they don't get more money from the government on this, I'm asking what Labour's strategy is, because presumably you don't want to go into the next election with other areas on the outskirts of London facing ULEZ expansion and the same thing happening as happened last night.
Well, I'm a Greater Manchester MP and we had the same thing with clean air zones, because we've got parts of Greater Manchester which also are facing this challenge and a legal ruling to ensure that the emissions come down. However, this government, this Conservative government, are refusing to fund and roll out. We've even seen it with electric battery car manufacturing.
Yes, but I'm asking what Labour do if they continue to refuse to fund. I'm sorry to cut across you, but I'm asking specifically, what do Labour do if the government refused to fund this anymore?
Keir has asked Sadiq to go back and look at this scheme, and I'm sure Sadiq will, and I'm sure he'll also put demands on the government to help people move to those green vehicles that we need. And it's the same as what happened in Greater Manchester, where our Mayor Andy Burnham did exactly the same, and Labour will come forward with our plans. We're part of our Green Prosperity Fund on making sure we can transition to electric vehicles and to less polluting vehicles, but not at the cost of working people who cannot afford another bombshell from the Conservatives in terms of charges.
Plenty of Labour voices now worried that what has happened in Uxbridge over the ULEZ scheme will be used by the Labour leader as justification for what they see as his caution, his reluctance to be bold. That he'll say, look at ULEZ expansion, very bold policy, unpopular, cost us the by-election, let's just go steady.
It's not about being bold, it's about having a radical programme that is fully costed, that sticks within our fiscal rules and doesn't penalise working people. We've seen for the past 13 years, people are really struggling. Our public services are on their knees now in crisis because of the Conservative government. We've got a mortgage bombshell from the Conservatives. They crashed the economy. What Keir is saying is he will not do anything that puts the productivity, the future growth of this nation and the security of our public services at risk, like the Conservatives did.
But you know there are voices within your own party who are really worried that when you talk about fiscal responsibility, what you mean is not being radical. They're particularly unhappy about Keir Starmer saying he is rolling back on his plan to scrap the two-child benefit cap. And there are many other policy areas that a lot of people within your party are worried about.
Sure, and I understand their thirst and their hunger to do things in this area. And for example, you know, I would love to have free school meals for every child, but what we've looked at is the data and how much we can afford. And we've, through our programme for government, means that every child will get a free breakfast. So that's about priorities and making sure the money hits it where we need it the most.
But it is exactly on that issue of child poverty that many people within your party are most worried.
The last Labour government raised millions of children out of poverty, and the next Labour government will do exactly the same again. But we won't lift them out of poverty if we can't get into government because we don't put a fiscally credible plan to the British people. And that's what we're saying. We will cost everything in the run-up to a general election. We will tackle child poverty. It's in our DNA. We always have done, and we will continue to do so, but we'll do it in a fiscally responsible way. We won't make promises that we can't keep.
Angela Rayner, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.